North of $117,000, ladies and gents, Bitcoin has managed to get that breakout, and it's not a breakout that we were too surprised with. Bitcoin was showing a lot of strength in the recent days. That's why I said that I thought it was going to be a little bit more likely that Bitcoin ends up breaking up. And more importantly, the S&P 500 is also now sitting again at all-time highs, coming after the rate cut news. Now, originally I thought that this was going to be a sell the news type event because we were pumping into it a month ago, but obviously since then the data changed a lot and we were actually seeing a much more bullish chart because the market pulled back instead of rallying into it. But that's actually turned out to be a really good outcome for us here, because with that rate cut news coming in yesterday, Bitcoin has managed to see a pretty sizable breakout and a continuation of the downtrend for Bitcoin's dominance. Take a look at Bitcoin's dominance as high. You've got, highs coming in at this kind of 58.8% level, and subsequent highs getting lower, and this one just confirming that we are now finding resistance off prior support with this market, I guess you could call it. So that's going to be a really good sign of optimism for altcoins right now. Here's Ethereum leading some of that strength, but really I think Solana is looking a hell of a lot better than that, because it's a lot closer to breaking a double top right now, and if it can break this double top, that's probably going to put Solana back inside this range, which stretches all the way up to 0.026 BTC per token, which is about, I don't know, like a 25% increase from where we are right now. Let's actually calculate that. Yeah, 25% increase from where we are right now. And that's going to be pretty bullish for Solana holders if we can see a breakout over here. But this is now starting to look a little bit stretched. Let's bring it back to the Bitcoin analysis, though, just for a minute, because I do want to hone in on what this means. The fact that Bitcoin is now back above $117,000, I think really, really does cement for us, first of all, before we even move on to that. I think it really cements for us that this was clearly a fake out. So too was this, and so too, of course, was this. So really, the real range that we're kind of trading in is going to be this range right here. We're getting a couple of deviations along the way. Obviously, you know how it works. We just take the scenic route with Bitcoin, but nothing particularly concerning or scary here whatsoever now, given that we have really climbed significantly further above this low here. I mean, from 107.5 to where we are now, this is a 10% move up, and it's taken just about 2.5 weeks, which I think is a pretty reasonable, respectable time frame for Bitcoin here. It is telling me, based on the fact that it's been nearly a non-stop rally now for a number of weeks, I mean, literally since the very end of August, which does now put us again, 2.5 weeks further down the line. We are probably going to be looking at some sort of a rejection coming in soon. The fact that it didn't, materialize in terms of a bigger correction off this 117k level tells me that it might actually happen off this 120k level, which, as we've been covering on this channel, is actually going to be one of Bitcoin's best case scenarios right now. It'd be really, really good if Bitcoin can get rejected off here and then instead find resistance at this significantly kind of higher support level compared to where we were dealing with before. And I think that's definitely going to be pretty important and useful for this market if we are able to kind of capture support off here, because that does really create the platform to break this resistance on a subsequent attack, and then for Bitcoin itself to also come back and start rallying toward all-time highs. So it really looks like Bitcoin is kind of catching up with the state that the S&P 500 is in, where it's more or less kind of actively trending up and setting brand new all-time highs pretty much week over week, and pretty much, non-stop setting those all-time highs since, late June, and we're now kind of approaching late September. So it has been a number of months continuously now that the S&P has been looking really good. Is that cause for a correction? I don't know. We've had, many, in this case, essentially 22 weeks straight. We've had many instances where the market kind of just continuously trends up. So I'm not too worried about this in terms of it being stretched out. Obviously, the more this happens, the more we're going to have to start looking for retracements. But I think as it stands right now, we haven't really been given much evidence to be kind of worried about any of that at the moment. So that's definitely pretty cool. And then again, just zooming in back in on Bitcoin, if that is going to turn into, something that Bitcoin ends up doing as well, I think it really does have some catch up to do. I think that's why it's been rallying up so well since the S&P has been showing that strength. And then if it is going to try and play catch up, we are probably looking at some pretty swift explosions if we can get above the previous all-time high at 124k. So honestly, I think things look pretty good right now. I think the market looks pretty healthy right now. Let's take a quick look at the fear and greed index and see what this is saying right here. We're neutral right now, just bang on neutral, which I think is, more or less one of the best places you want to be. as far as sentiment in this market, especially if we are pumping above some of these levels. Obviously, we might see this kind of reaching some, like low greed levels here, the 60s and so on, but definitely still not looking too bad whatsoever. And I think just the fact that Bitcoin has been able to get above this, resistance level now after confirming it as resistance is going to make it so much more likely that on a potential drawdown, it actually is able to use this support level. So I'm looking at somewhere like 116.8 and so on. This might be opening up opportunities in altcoins, right? So I've looked at Solana against Bitcoin, but Solana against the dollar is quite a bit higher than where it was at the beginning of this month. It's now up to $250, which makes sense because it has been outpacing Bitcoin. That's been my point, and it is now making another run for its all-time high. This is the third time it's trying to run and break its previous all-time high from 2021. It did actually briefly do that here, but obviously that doesn't really count because we ended up plunging much lower afterwards. In fact, this was like a 66% drop, by the way. This was brutal. So quite a sizable drop there for Solana. But now third time lucky, more or less. I don't know, but obviously in my experience, if we're hitting a level for the third time, especially on a macro scale like this, we are overwhelmingly likely to break it, especially if that's happening inside of an uptrend, which has been proven on the daily time frame, on the weekly time frame as well. We're clearly inching higher and setting higher lows in this market, and we are also clearly setting higher highs. So I believe this was an all-time high over the previous high, then a slightly higher one. Even if we did the same thing again now, that would still put Solana at about $330, which would probably do wonders for Solana against Bitcoin as well, which I think is really cool. You guys know that I've been loving Cardano as well. Like I said, I don't really look at these USD charts against the dollar. It actually looks like it's against some pretty significant dangerous resistance right now, but against Bitcoin, more or less the same picture. It is also up against some pretty significant resistance. But I think that Bitcoin's chart really paints a much clearer image. If Cardano can slam through that resistance level the same way that Solana did, then we're probably looking at a huge explosion there. XRP has been largely sideways. This looks so fucking bullish, though. I can't even lie. I mean, the fact that this thing is just holding steady here inside of an incredibly strong uptrend, it just looks like it's going to pop again. I don't know when. I don't know how high it'll go when it does. But it just really looks like it will. Obviously, I don't know the future. Always do your own research. Don't be an idiot. But that's just kind of what my own analysis is telling me. I think Binance Coin looks really interesting, ladies and gents. Binance Coin had deviated below this support level, which it used for a long time, from literally, what was this, like April of 2021. It managed to use this support level until November of 2024, right, when Trump was elected, and then it absolutely shit the bed, fell out of this support level, and it's more or less been below the support level now for nearly a year, for like 10 months, and it's now managed to get back above this level. So if we are going to see a further continuation up followed by a pullback into this range against Bitcoin, this thing could look very, very interesting. Once again, for those of you that are a little bit new to this channel, the reason we look at the Bitcoin charts instead of the USD charts is because we're more interested in seeing coins that outperform Bitcoin, right? You and I understand that Bitcoin is going to be one of the safer assets in crypto, and that's kind of a default, right? If you're in crypto, you're probably holding Bitcoin to start. And if you're going to invest in anything that's not Bitcoin, you would only typically do that because you think you're going to make more money from it, and that you're going to make that more money faster. But if your risk to reward isn't looking great, maybe you make a little bit more money, but your risk jumps up 2x. That's not really worth it, right? I'm looking for opportunities where it's actually pretty safe and I can still multiply my Bitcoin. And I definitely think that's what charts like Binance Coin could be offering against Bitcoin. Against the dollar, obviously, it is doing incredible, and it is just at incredible all-time highs right now, which is really, really cool. But again, not super relevant to me. I'm more interested in what it does against Bitcoin. So far, it's up 44% in about 2 months. And if it is going to see any of its kind of highs from earlier, especially off this support level, that's already another 50% pump, or to the all-time high, that's going to be a 2.5% pump as well, 2.5 times pump as well. So that would be really, really cool. Dogecoin has woken up as well. Dogecoin's sitting at 28 cents. It's just a bunch of shit's just waking up, ladies and gents. But a lot of these coins are still, Dogecoin, for example, still suppressed under this key resistance level. If this resistance level is broken, then I think the picture might get a lot more interesting for Doge. But as it stands right now, resistance is resistance. Same picture for Cardano. Same picture for Solana. Same picture for Ethereum BTC. The chart is clearly telling us we are up against resistance right now, and resistance is where rejections happen, but we've already been getting rejected off these levels, right? Here's Cardano continuously getting rejected off this level since May of this year, that we're dealing with right now. Obviously, XRP continuously getting rejected off this level since December of 2024. So we are continuously hitting these resistance levels. So even though your standard analysis is going to be telling you, hey, resistance is where we get, rejections. Well, actually, we have been getting rejections, and the rejections haven't been disastrous for the market. So that at some point, you're going to have to read through that and be like, all right, well, I get it that there's resistance up ahead, but clearly the market is kind of shrugging that off, and we're still charging towards these levels anyway, again and again and again. And that is going to be an indication typically that these resistance levels will break. There are no guarantees in this market. That's why we have this beautiful disclaimer. There are no guarantees in this market, and you've got to make sure that you're doing your own research and staying super, super thorough with everything that you do. But with that in mind, we are able to use certain tools of analysis that can tell us when probabilities are shifting. And I think one of the key ones we can use are just, what we've been covering here in terms of kind of analyzing how we're interacting with certain levels. Now, this market, as you may have noticed, maybe not, I don't know, is very, very hot. And if you want to be trading on the best places in the game, then Bybit remains the best in the game with iceberg and TWAP orders that allow you to enter with larger amounts of liquidity without actually spooking the market as much. Super, super cool stuff. Check that out if you're interested. And if you're looking for an alternative to Bybit, LevX is fantastic, and you're getting all of the same features that you're used to in terms of, very normal layout. They obviously all look the same these days, the exchanges, but also great liquidity, proof of reserves, and all that beautiful stuff. So check them both out if you're not from a restricted region. If you want to get inside of our one-to-one program, you can reach out for information by following this link on screen right here. Check out Caleb & Brown for OTC buying and selling. This is really, really cool, especially if you're based somewhere in the West. These guys can buy and sell crypto for you, send it into your bank account, all sorts of beautiful stuff like that. And I have found them personally to be very, very useful. So good stuff there, ladies and gents. Hope you've all enjoyed this one. You know what to do. If you have, smash up the likes, subscribe, tick the bell, do all the good stuff, and we will see you all in the next one.